Hi guys, it's Namita.
And Ramesh.
Are you considering an RV trip? It's a great way to explore locally while being socially distant, especially in these pandemic times. We went on a little adventure last fall and we wanted to share what we learned with you. So here are some basic tips and just information to get you started on planning that RV trip.
Right. And so there's kind of two types of RVs in general. There's trailers which don't have an engine, and so you have to attach it to your existing car or truck, and you can take it with you from camp to camp. You can disconnect it so that you can leave it at site. It's a little bit smaller, but you do have the flexibility of taking your car with you separately from the trailer. Then there's motorhomes, which do have an engine, and so they move obviously with you everywhere you drive them. In terms of increasing size, there's three types. So Class B is the smallest type, and this is basically the size of a van. It's meant for two people, so it's a little smaller, easier to drive though. And then the next size is Class A. So Class A is about the size of a U-Haul, so it's a little bit bigger, more spacious, can fit up to 4 people, maybe a bit harder to drive if you're not familiar with kind of a U-Haul, driving a U-Haul. And then the biggest one of all is Class C, which is the size can be very large, up to the size of a bus. We've seen some big ones on the road. I'm sure you have as well.
They're huge.
So they're obviously very spacious, lots of space. An entire family can travel in them in style, but more difficult to drive. You may not be able to go to all the campsites because they might not be big enough. And also, you may not be able to rent these from kind of the regular websites that are out there, but you can rent them from apps like RV'ing. So that's an option. So these are kind of the different types of motorhomes or RVs. We ended up choosing the Class B because we're only 2 people, and it's a bit easier to drive and made the most sense for us.
Okay, so now that you know about the types of RVs and kind of have an idea about what kind of one that you would like, here's where you can start planning a general overview of the trip. You probably don't want to go into all the fine details yet because that can be a bit overwhelming, but here are some things that you should start considering now. The first is the approximate dates of when you want to go. Is it a fall trip, summer trip? Do you want to do it on a long weekend, etc.? The next thing you want to consider is how long do you want this trip to be? We would recommend like at least maybe 5 days or so. Some rentals do have minimums, so you want to be mindful of that as well. I mean, you could go on like a little weekend trip, but I mean, it's more fun to do like a longer one, especially because you get to drive a bit more, you get to go further. And the next thing you want to consider is where do you want to go? What do you want to do on this trip? So kind of a general region or area that you want to go to, maybe some national parks, provincial parks, some cities that you haven't been to before. And maybe some type of activity that you're trying to do, like hiking, kayaking, stuff like that. Those are some things to think about and have a general idea of where you'd like to go.
Yeah, and when you do have that general idea, whether you're doing kind of like a round trip or going to one place or back, it's a good idea to just map it out initially on Google Maps. It doesn't have to be precise, exact locations, but just get a sense of what the distances are and how long it will take to kind of drive there. You want to be careful of a couple things. Obviously, some of these highways, you may not be able to go at the speed that you're imagining. And also, you should try to consider that driving an RV is a little more difficult than driving a car. So budget for lots of spare time, maybe even double kind of what the driving time that Google Maps gives you, to be safe. You don't want to be rushed driving an RV, at least for the first time.
I think we've all been stuck behind like the slow driving RV. Guys, that's gonna be you.
Exactly. So put in some extra time there. Other things that you should also consider in terms of budget is obviously the RV can be very big, so fuel is a big cost. Depends really on the size of the RV. It could be 10 to 30 liters per 100 kilometers, so that is probably a lot more than what your car consumes. So definitely budget for that. Based on the distance you're going. And then if you are camping in kind of provincial parks or national parks or even private campgrounds, you do have to pay a certain fee to be able to use those campsites. It could be, $30, $50, depending on where you're parking. So definitely budget for that as well. Okay, so now you should have a pretty good idea of where you're going, how far you're going, what are kind of the dates, how long this trip will take. So you're ready to book. And so go ahead and book that RV. There are multiple websites out there. We used in Canada, Canadream, which we recommend, but there's lots of options. And there's also a great app called RV'ing where you can rent from other RV owners. And so these are private vehicles, but you can rent them and you can get some really nice ones for reasonable prices.
Yeah.
So that's another option. So go ahead and book that for the dates that you're planning, and obviously, take off your time off at work and everything and get all that settled in. So once you've booked, now it's time to do the detailed planning.
Yes.
Plan out your routes and the dates
Fill in all the details.
And the stops that you want to take. When we went on our trip, we had a very, I would say, detailed itinerary. We knew which parks we wanted to hit on particular dates, and we left enough time for us to be able to safely travel there. You may want to, depending on your comfort with planning or not planning, you may want to leave it more open. That's one of the great things about an RV. Worst case, you can just park it somewhere and you can't go to sleep.
Exactly.
And so, if you're comfortable with that, you could do that. For our first time, we wanted to know we would be in certain national parks or provincial parks on what dates. And so we stuck mostly to that schedule, although we did shift here and there.
We moved it around during the trip just because we could. We thought, we want to stay one extra night in this park. So we did it.
Yeah, exactly. And on our next trip, we'll actually be a little more loose in our planning. Because now that we are comfortable with the RV, we know we can stop and
we kind of have more like locations that we need to reach by a certain point rather than like each night is booked at a campsite somewhere, etc. Okay, so now is when you get to decide where you'll be staying, because you do need to park somewhere overnight. Obviously don't recommend driving in the night, by the way. So you have some options for that. You could do provincial or national parks. You've got private campgrounds, RV parks, resorts, or you can boondock, which is the fancy name for just parking wherever, basically. You could also pull off into designated parking lots like Walmart, etc., where I think you can just go talk to the manager and be like, hey, we're parking here for the night, and they'll be cool with it. But you do need to consider some things. You would have to fill up your water probably every other day or so, depending on how much you're using. So this is the water tank for your washroom, your kitchen sink, etc. And the next thing that you need to be mindful of is dump stations to empty your black water and gray water tanks. So that's the waste. And you need to kind of empty that so you can continue to use it. And those are probably the two most important things that you need to think about while you're spacing out your stops, basically, to make sure that you do kind of hit water and a dump station every 2 days or so at least. And the third thing you might want to think about is electricity. Some people like to have it. You don't kind of always need it, but because you can still run your kitchen without it really. It runs on propane, your fridge and your stove. So you could go without electricity, but it is nice to have a TV or something once in a while, And the microwave, by the way. You can't use the microwave without the electricity, so.
Yeah.
And the last thing that you want to think about is whether your campsites are seasonal or year-round. So if you're going on the shoulder seasons, like spring or fall, not everything will be open, so you want to check that out and make sure that those places are actually operating before you go.
So for our first time, we did decide to stay mostly in provincial parks because we knew that we could get water there, we could empty our tanks there, no issues really. And so we didn't really have to worry about getting all those kind of things. But on our next trip, we're actually planning to be a little more adventurous and find kind of dump locations and water locations outside of provincial parks so that we're not confined to always going to a provincial park. So there are a couple apps and websites that are great for finding these. So two of the apps are WikiCamps and iOverlander. You could find them both on the App Store or Google Store. And we really liked WikiCamps.
Yes.
We thought it was great for Canada at least. And then there are a couple websites as well. One is called campendium.com and sannydumps.com. And these will tell you locations for things like dumps and places where you can rest with your RV and park overnight. So there are a few options. We really liked WikiCamp where we were, but we'll leave more links for other.
So you can check out. You can kind of try them out at home just to see which one you like, basically. Yeah.
So our trip, to give you an idea of how we thought about it, we're obviously picking up our RV in Toronto, and we wanted to go to both Algonquin and Killarney parks and come back as a round trip. That was our overall trip idea.
Yeah. The first day we didn't want to go driving too far, so we decided to go to Algonquin first. So it's only about 4 hours from Toronto, and we could stop and pick up groceries on the way as well.
Right. You want to go not too far on the first day so that you can get used to the RV and get used to how it drives and everything.
How to park,
all those kind of things. Anyway. And then we ended up staying there 2 nights to do activities and things, lots of things to do in Algonquin. So we did that for 2 nights. And that's a good amount of time, I think, to stay in one spot.
Next, we knew we wanted to go to Killarney, but that was quite a long journey between Killarney and Algonquin, so we wanted to break up the trip. For that, we stayed at Killbear Provincial Park. I think we were there 2 nights as well.
And then we went to Killarney. We stayed there 2 nights as well. I think 2 nights per park is a kind of a great...
Yeah, it's a good way to see everything, but you don't get bored.
And then we made our way back, and we had to return the RV
back to the spot we picked it up.
So we actually came to a local park, which was close to the rental spot, and so we did that the night before. We camped in this local RV camp, and then because of that, the next morning we were not stressed. We were very close to where the RV rental.
Not in a rush to return your RV, which can be kind of stressful. So
so basically the first and last day, try to make sure you're not going too far from where you need to bring the RV. And then plan out your trip with lots of nice breaks in between and lots of time to rest and do activities. So that's it. I think that gives you a quick overview of everything you need to consider for booking an RV trip. If you're thinking about it and if you're on the fence, I think we highly recommend it. We really enjoyed it. It's fun. You get to kind of
you can explore locally, like I said before. You're not too worried about coming too much into contact with people because you have your own washroom. You're not worried about having to go into rest stops or public restrooms, and you can maintain your social distance. You can go to parks and do all of these activities without having to book a hotel, for example. You've got your hotel on wheels. So.
Yeah, exactly. We really like the flexibility. If you want to cook in your RV instead of campfire, if you wanted, you don't have to set up a tent. You just set up your bed in the RV, which is much easier. Really enjoyed it. Highly recommend.
Comfortable as well, I would say, than car camping, for example. So although we love car camping, but an RV trip is just a different feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let us know. Are there any other questions you have? Leave
Yeah.
them in the comments and we'll answer them. And subscribe for more videos that we're planning,
Yes.
actually. This
Yeah.
was a quick overview of the RV experience. We'll provide more videos that detail out the whole RV experience a little more. And
Yes.
also we are planning another RV trip, as we
Yes.
mentioned.
Yeah.
So that will definitely be one of the videos.
Yes.
And
Stay tuned to see how that goes.
yeah, exactly. So if you want to see a full RV trip, we'll be doing that in the month of May. So that'll be coming up shortly.
Yeah.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Thanks for watching. Bye.